Welcome to the Sublime Soiree. I'm Sue, and we are so honored to welcome a special guest to our table today. We at the Sublime Soiree seek to inspire and encourage women to live free above the fray by inviting them to celebrate biblical truth by sampling soiree secrets and seeking expert advice. Today, we want to introduce to you Gem Fadling, a person we believe you are going to want to know more about. She is a co-founder of Unhurried Living Incorporated, where she and her husband train Christian leaders to rest deeper, live fuller, and lead better. She has a podcast called I Can Do That, and she is the author of Hold That Thought. We're excited to hear from Gem today as she shares with us some expert advice.
Hi, everyone. And this month, we're going to be continuing our conversation about rest. And we kicked off that conversation actually by interviewing Gem's husband, Alan. And we aired those videos last week on Monday and Tuesday. And if you haven't had the opportunity to go look at those videos, we hope you will, because it was filled with all sorts of great nuggets. And now we have this added benefit of being able to talk with Gem. And we're so excited about that. So Gem, we want to get right into our interview. But before we do, we wanted to ask you if you could just tell us a little bit about yourself. And we're also kind of curious. We wanted to know what prompted your desire to mentor women and to teach them about soul care.
Yeah, well, thank you guys so much for having me here. And I have to admit the word expert scares me a little bit. I don't, we'll have to find out if I'm an expert on anything. But what I like to do is I just share my life. I share all the things that God has given me and the wisdom that I've gained over the years. And hopefully that some of that will work for you. But yeah, so you pretty much said it. I work at Unhurried Living right now. I'm in the, kids are all raised season of life. And so there's this beautiful energy that emerges. And my husband and I founded Unhurried Living about 8 or 9 years ago. And we've been building this as sort of the second half of life ministry that we're both partnering in. And it's just been a delight to be able to, as I mentioned, just offer who I am and what I know. And so within the work we do, we work with Christian leaders of all kinds, missionaries, pastors, business people, just people who would call themselves a Christian leader. But in particular, I love to talk with women because I have loved my own journey. I'm fascinated by transformation. I just think it's like the best news ever that I can change.
Yes,
that
absolutely.
that I'm not stuck. And even if it takes a while for me to figure out what to do or even to make the change, it is possible. And so because I love that journey in my own life for myself and with myself, I love to walk alongside women as they take that journey as well. I think there's something very special about us, the way we interact, the way we care, the way we are very serious. The women I work with are so serious in a good way about their relationship with God. Right? They want to grow, they want to love, they want to serve. And since we're in Unhurried Living, they want to do it in a way that's sustainable. So we're not killing ourselves in the process. Right?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Gem, in your book, Hold That Thought, you talk about the voices we have in our head, and it really made us think about an interview we heard a while back. I think it was Focus on the Family, called The Fred in Your Head. And it reminds us, that interview, that imposter voice that likes to take residence and almost pretend that it's the true us. And you mention in your book that some of the messages we hear are, you're not good enough, you need to try harder, everything is fine. You share about quieting these narratives. How do you quiet these voices in your head?
Yeah. So, thanks for mentioning this. The word quieting is interesting. I suppose we're quieting them. What we're trying to actually do is something probably more akin to what internal family systems would talk about, and that's befriending.
Okay.
Right. Because what we all have voices in our heads. And in the book, I use thoughts and voices synonymously.
Okay.
Right. Because am I the only one? You guys have something going on here all the
Oh,
time,
yes.
right?
Yes. Yes.
Voices that tell you, what are you doing? That wasn't right. What will they think? You'll never make it. I mean, whatever. There could be judgmental voices or shaming voices, all kinds of voices. And so what I'm trying to get at in here is that the big insight is we are not our thoughts. For so much of my life, I thought my thoughts were me. But the thing is I have thoughts, which means I get to take one step back and notice them. And so I think when you're asking the question about quieting, I think one way we can quiet or befriend is to just realize that it's not me and that I have choices. Right. So when I learned that, it was like this bell went off in my head and I had a whole new kind of realm of freedom to walk in now, because now I knew I could step back. So there's a little, I don't know if you want to call it a method inside the book. Would it be okay if I just shared it? It's just the quick version of it.
Yes, sure.
What's great about this is you can just keep it in your back pocket. And if you happen to notice that there's a thought that is recurring, but it's not helping you. Right? I like to use the words helpful and unhelpful.
Okay.
Because good and bad sometimes gets a little wonky because we don't always know what's good or bad, because we could be labeling like sadness or grief. Someone might think that's bad. Oh, I can't grieve. But no, we must grieve. So we try to, is this helping me or not helping me right now? And what can I do about that? So there's this little acronym NDR. It stands for notice, discern, and respond.
Okay.
So in that space in between, like trigger and then reaction or overreaction, there's actually a space in between those two that we don't always take advantage of.
Okay.
So the invitation is to, instead of just trigger, react. What if you could notice that you've been triggered? Take a moment to discern what's going on and then move to maybe a response that would be more helpful to you. So that's the thing. And there's this beautiful sort of image or metaphor I use to help describe the notice, discern, and respond. And that's the inner dining table. Like many of us have dining rooms. I don't know, it depends on what size apartment or house you live in, but it's usually a rectangle and there's chairs all the way around. In the old days, in Leave It to Beaver days, of course, the dad would sit at the head of the table. So I like to use the image of sometimes these unhelpful voices come and they sit at the head of the table. I can notice when that happens, and I can go to the head, take my rightful place, right? It's my life. I get to decide what goes on here. So if there's an unhelpful voice sitting there, noticing is when I go, oh, someone else is calling the shots, because I'm hearing a lot of judgment. I'm hearing a lot of shame. I'm hearing a lot of guilt. What if I just went to the head of the table and thank you so much, whoever's there, if you've got the perfectionist sitting at the head of the table for a minute, thank you so much for all this information you're giving me.
Okay.
Why don't you, I know this sounds a little crazy, but I'm just, it's a little way you can play around inside yourself and go, okay, I don't need this voice running the show. So thank you. Why don't you go sit at the side of the table and see, we're not kicking out of the room. We're not shaming them.
Right.
I'm saying, thank you for the information. Why don't you sit down? And then you just discern what's going on here. Why is perfectionism rising up inside of me? Ask yourself a few questions and see what might be going on. And when you even just take that time to not kick anybody out, but just to listen, you could then move to a response instead of a reaction. So that's just a very brief description of sort of the nugget that runs through the whole book. Notice, discern, and respond.
I love that, NDR. The gentleman that we were listening to, the reason that he called this voice the Fred in his head was because that was not his name.
Right.
So he gave it a name to recognize this is not me. This is someone else within me, not me, who's saying that. And yes, the befriending is a great way to go about that, because so many times we want to kick those voices out completely, right?
Yeah, and that's just impossible because they're just going to come back anyway. So you may as well, take a look at what's going on and not overreact and just work with what's happening.
Right, right. Yes, for sure.
Mhm.
So that is a beautiful form of care. And as you know, we've been talking about rest, and soul care seems like a perfect companion to rest. So could you talk with us a little bit about what your practices are for soul care, and then why it's important for all of us to really be participating in soul care? And then I had another question. Do you believe that soul care is an invitation by Jesus to be more present with him, to be more present with ourselves, and to be more present with others?
Yes, I think you just answered the question. Yes, 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 yes. I'll just say yes to all those things. I mean, soul care and self-care are terms that can kind of get thrown around, and that's fine. I mean, you could use them synonymously if you wanted to, depends on what you're doing with them. I do think Jesus invites us to rest because Jesus modeled that, right? There's a verse, I think it's in Luke. Jesus often withdrew to lonely places to pray, it says. Often. My guess is Alan said that verse to you as well. Because it's a verse we point to often to show that Jesus had a way about him. Do you remember how the times the disciples were looking for him and he was off?
Yes.
Listening to the voice of the Father.
Yes.
Praying, he would say. It is good for us not only to follow the messages of Jesus, but the way. And so, yes, he healed and he worked and he preached and he went off to lonely places. So I think it's a 100% an invitation. And even if you just think anecdotally, people are talking about this all over the internet right now about whether you're a Christian or not, about how healthy it is for us to have rest and play and downtime and margin. So this is just God has made us this way because we're human beings, right?
Yes.
And I think in the culture, it's easy to fall into the trap of thinking that I'm a machine somehow. I'm just a widget maker that's always having to produce something. But rest is an invitation. So soul care is important. And soul care inside of that, I mean, there's just a million things you can do because honestly, yes, it's prayer. Yes, it's time with Jesus. And yes, it's also just engaging in the things that are life-giving. And for different people, that means different things. Someone might think it's life-giving to take a nap or read a book or sit quietly in their room. For others, that would drive them crazy. They have to get outside and garden or hike or swim. So one question I like to ask is what enlivens you? What brings you to life, or what causes you to feel joy or refreshes you? These are all soul care questions.
Okay.
Right. The trick though then is what are you going to, once you make that list, what are you going to do about it?
Right.
Putting some new things into practice.
Exactly. So in your own rhythms, do you find yourself, have you gotten into a discipline of kind of scheduling that rest then, being very intentional?
I am intentional. So I have, if we're talking about just sort of what you might call spiritual, practices, I have rhythms of daily, weekly, monthly, and yearly, and they're well, I'll just tell you what they are. So daily, I like to have some version of something what you might call quiet time in the morning. I know that's a kind of a weird buzzword from the old days, but you know what I mean? Some version of something. I read a scripture, or I'll pray for the people that I love, or I will sometimes I just have really good spiritual reading books, poetry, images that are evocative. There's some great books out there where people have painted imagery that has to do with the Psalms. So I have a bunch of different ways that I could pause and just receive from God. And that's brief in the morning. And then weekly, of course, we just have a Sabbath set aside, which is it's not even a big deal. I just make sure that I don't work on the weekends at all. But especially Friday after dinner to Saturday after dinner, I don't look at email. I don't do any work. I just do what I want to do.
Okay. Nice. Good. Nice.
So it's just a rhythm now that's inside of me. And I just know that there are things that I don't do, which allows me to do other fun things.
Mm-hmm.
And then monthly, I have about a 2 to 4 hour block set aside on a Friday morning. And I call that sort of my unhurried time with God.
Okay.
And then I focus in. I'll usually journal for a long time or read something really good, or I'll get myself to a local lake and just look at beauty. I mean, it's a refilling focus time. So that's monthly.
Okay.
And then yearly, my husband and I now have done three years in a row. In July, we call it a mini sabbatical.
Mm-hmm.
We block off the whole month of July. We do absolutely no work, no email, no social media, and we go on vacations and we visit friends and family. And so those are my sort of established rhythms. And I find that having those in place really helps in an ongoing way.
Friends, thank you for watching.
Stay tuned tomorrow as we have part 2 of our conversation with Gem Fadling, and she shares with us the importance of doing life together.